culture. Classic pop culture.
Hi everybody, this is Steve Ludwig, host of Steve Ludwig's Classic Pop Culture and the Beatles Hour with Steve Ludwig at planetludwig.com. Here's an interview we did with Ginger Alden on December 9th, 2014. It's from show number 69. To hear the entire show, check out the menu at planetludwig.com. And now, please enjoy the interview. Our guest is a wonderful author. I read her book cover to cover in a couple of days because I couldn't put it down. She is Elvis's fiancée and really his last love. She's written a wonderful loving book called Elvis and Ginger. It is such a pleasure to welcome Ms. Ginger Alden to the show. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I'll tell you, Ginger, I don't know if it's possible, but all of us who love Elvis, after reading your book, I loved him even more. He was such a wonderful guy.
Oh, absolutely, and thank you very much. I mean, it was a very emotional journey for me to take, but, you know, there had been a lot of exaggerations and untruths out over the years, and, you know, it had to be done, and it's a little late for me, but I had written down my memories shortly after Elvis passed away as a way just to hold on to them, and I went forward with my life. I worked. I got married in 1991, had my son, but you know, during the course of that time, you know, I was hearing bits and pieces that were untruths, exaggerations said, fabricated tales, and it was hard not to write a book sooner, but I didn't want to lose time with my son, and I knew it was going to be a very emotional journey for me to take and take a lot of time. And my son went off to college 2 years ago, and the minute he left the house, I sat down and put together my memories.
Yeah, you know, Ginger, it's hearing you say that, it's not surprising because even throughout the book, Ginger, Elvis and Ginger, you seem to always have your priorities right. I mean, with your family and everything else, and now, you know, later on in life with your husband and your son. Can you give our listeners a little background? How did you first meet Elvis?
Well, my father was in recruiting. I have to step back here a little way.
Yeah.
My father was in recruiting and public relations for the Army, and he actually met Elvis when Elvis was inducted at his Army induction in 1958. And then you jump to 1960 when Elvis was out of the Army. My dad stopped by Graceland a couple of times for some little Army newsletter tidbits, and he met one of Elvis's uncles, who was a guard at the gate, and Elvis's uncle invited my parents to the movies once with Elvis. Elvis would rent out the theater and take you know, various friends and family members, and then later my parents were also invited to the fairgrounds. And when my parents went to the fairgrounds that night, they were allowed to bring their children, and other people were bringing their kids. And so my siblings and I went to the fairgrounds. This was, I believe, around 1960. And I remember meeting Elvis. I was 5 years old, and he patted me and my sister Terry on our head. So that was the very first meeting, actual meeting. But then you had to jump to the year 1976, and my sister Terry then was Miss Tennessee, and we received a phone call at our home from a friend of Elvis's, George Klein, who was a local disc jockey in Memphis, and he said that Elvis was interested in meeting the new Miss Tennessee. And so on that evening, it was November of 1976, my sister Rosemary and I accompanied my sister Terry, and we met Elvis that November, and things changed for me after that night.
Yeah, it was... I don't know if I could say love at first sight, but boy, he was attracted to you from the start, wasn't he? From that night on.
Well, I was certainly attracted to him.
Yeah.
As well.
As
a
young girl, I would imagine.
You know, I have to set up. Yeah, you know, anyone that knew me, I was a very shy person, and you know, I didn't talk a lot, but I was just, you know, I was very quiet, and but I thought he was gorgeous. We were. The night that we actually went to Graceland, and I said for my, you know, I had grown up in Memphis, and for my siblings and I, it was like going to the White House, you know, to meet the president. Mm-hmm. And we were taken on a little tour when we first got. We were told that Elvis was practicing karate, and we were eventually taken upstairs to his daughter Lisa's room. And I just remember that Elvis came walking in and wearing this little karate outfit, and I just looked at him and I blurted out, you know, "Hi, Elvis," like I'd known him for years, and. someone must have told told him who each of me and my sisters were, because he shook our hand and called us each correctly by our names. And so, but that night he was quite the gentleman and fun, outgoing, very down to earth. And but at a point in the evening, he said, "Ginger, you're burning a hole right through me." And I was like, "Who, me?" I was embarrassed. I thought, he thinks I'm staring at him. And he goes, "Yes, you." But he ended up taking us on a tour of his upstairs, at his home. And that night, from that night on, we started to see each other.
Mm. Ginger, throughout your whole book, and I can't stress this enough to our listeners, we're speaking with Ginger Alden, by the way. The name of the book is Elvis and Ginger. You've made it so clear that Elvis he had a heart of gold. He was just a wonderful, wonderful person.
Oh yeah, he generous to a fault with so many people. After Elvis passed away, it wasn't just my family he was generous with. I found out he had given maids and nurses and doctors and close friends, bought them new homes and cars. And after Elvis and I were going out, he wanted me closer to Graceland, and he wanted me to have. I actually shared a room with my sister Terry, and my parents had just purchased a new home just a few months earlier that year. And when Elvis wanted something, he really pursued it, and he was adamant about. They kept bringing up throughout the course of our relationship. He wanted me to have my own room, and then it transferred over into my parents having a new home. And he even went with us one night, set up a whole meeting with a realtor to look at a home, and just had a heart of gold and deep, deep concern for so many others, which was such an admirable quality of his.
Oh, was it ever? And another thing I noticed through reading with the book, you had a big on family values, and so was Elvis. Huh? I can see why you two were attracted to each other in that sense as well. Once you got to know each other, family was big, wasn't it?
You look at Elvis. He had, my goodness, cards at the gate were his uncles. He had stepbrothers, on his staff that were hired as employees. His grandmother lived in his home, his aunt, his father. He had a home built for his father close by. And he understood, family. And, I was close to my family, and Elvis took them on as his own. And, they were all given his famous PCB, TLC necklaces. And, he understood that. And, but we shared also, my mother, her father had been a minister when she was a young child, and she had been inspired by both of her parents, and my mother played a lot of gospel music on our piano, and she was quite musically talented herself. She could play guitar and mandolin, and I played a little guitar, and my sister was a great classical pianist. But I remembered standing behind my mother many times, and while she played gospel hymns, and our whole family would kind of come in and sing. And Elvis had an organ in his office upstairs at Graceland, and he would play the organ many times for me and sing. And so it felt a little like home, as he did that. But we shared spiritual interests. He read many, many books, and we both loved good Southern food, and I loved motorcycles, and so yes, we had quite a few things in common.
Yeah, Ginger, I learned something about Elvis by reading your book as well. He was such a deep, deep thinker, and I don't know why, but some people might be surprised to hear that. He was very into numerology, and he was always had a million books that he wanted to share with you. I think that's something a lot of people don't realize about Elvis.
Well, here you have this rock and roll icon. I remember the very first night I met him, and my sisters actually they weren't sent home, but they were given the option when he had kind of singled me out, and I ended up sitting. He was quite the gentleman. I ended up sitting in his bed with him at Graceland, and we were going over books on numerology, and I remember there was a large book that he pulled out, and it reminded me, my mother had this old family Bible, and there were all these beautiful illustrations in it, and this book had what Elvis told me symbolized God, and there was this man sitting on this large throne with a long white beard, and the symbols of fire, ice, wind, and rain were at his sides, and Elvis talked about this for hours with me and was pointing out, and I'd ask a few questions, and I was blown away that this was what he was interested in at this point in his life with me, and he was on a very serious spiritual quest, certainly.
Mm. I'd like to quote something you wrote in your book. I think it's so telling to how great of an author you were and how it was what made it so much more enjoyable. You wrote, "I felt stunned that he would give me gifts so early in our relationship, and unsettled that everything seemed to move so fast with him. I wondered if Elvis did this sort of thing with women on a regular basis, or whether he was serious about wanting me to belong to him." Ginger, you wrote what so many of us would think, what the normal person would think. You really put yourself out there, and that's so appreciated as a reader. You didn't sugarcoat things. You were It's obviously a loving relationship, but you weren't afraid to share with us your doubts at the beginning.
Well, I wrote, I didn't want to write it from my age now, and it was when I sat down and I pieced together all the things I had written down, as I said, shortly after he passed away. And it was, the feelings were so strong and still there, and to relive it and go moment by moment, and I would hope to put the reader in the room with me. And, I thought it was fair to write it as a 20-year-old.
Hmm.
And
Was
that experience and that first time, I stepped in the front door of Graceland.
was that tough, Ginger? Years later, saying to yourself, reading what you had written as a 20-year-old, your thoughts, saying, and did you say, I can't write that now. I'm so much older and wiser. Not older, but I'm wiser now. Was it tough to just go back?
Older.
Listen, I have a few years on you, Ginger, so you're not old, believe me. But was it tough just to keep the things, your thoughts from as a 20-year-old? Like, did you ever want to edit
No,
yourself and say, I
it
can't
was,
say that?
there were such the special, exciting moments to relive, and I had written down exact sentences that he said, and I remembered them so clearly, and reliving it, and trying to put as I said, trying to put the reader in that moment. And then, for those who will read the book, there were some very emotional times I had to write about because I felt it was fair. I didn't want to sugarcoat and to put the truth in, but that's the thing that's been the hardest for me is there were exaggerated things. There were things that people didn't understand or what was going on behind closed doors, and I had to write truthfully my journey as a 20-year-old young woman. How I tried to help Elvis at times and tried to understand, his ways, and he wanted me to learn so much about him, and I fell in love with him deeply, and it was just this whirlwind romance, and he was consuming my life, but it ended all too quickly, unfortunately, and but I had to write my journey, and I wrote it as honestly as I could, and I hope that the reader, would walk away with a better understanding of our relationship.
Do we ever? Yeah, I want our listeners to know, for those that don't know, you were 20 years old, Elvis was 42, yet he seemed to always have this teenager's love for life. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, it's funny. He loved to joke around. He would do small practical jokes. He liked McDonald's gift certificates to friends. Yes, he rode motorcycles. He rode three-wheelers. He'd be like a big kid if he got on his daughter Lisa's golf cart and riding in behind the horses. And, it was like there was no medium with Elvis. He either went too slow or too fast. There was no like in between. But when we were together, there was more, I didn't think of our age difference, really. I felt Elvis was a little more fatherly. He loved teaching. He loved showing me new things and taking me new places. But he was more fatherly toward me when we were reading, and he was always trying to teach me, certain things. But, I had heard stories, before he met me. They used to have, what was it, what do you call the fireworks rocket? They would shoot at each other and things like that. That's definitely a teenage side. I didn't witness that in our time together, but I would certainly say he did have that teenager's lust for life.
You mentioned Lisa Marie. You had a very, very nice relationship with Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter. Could we talk about that a bit? Could you tell us a little bit about Lisa Marie? And she actually referred to you as her second mommy sometimes.
Sure. I wrote, Lisa was independent. She knew she was Elvis's daughter. I wish there had been more time to get to know her better. I mean, she would come. She was at Graceland more that last summer. But she was on tour a few times, and we were both getting to know each other. And I wrote about the times I took her when I first met her in Las Vegas, and I took her shopping one day and hoped she would would like me, and yes, when she found out that my ring that Elvis had given me was an engagement ring, she called me mommy. She didn't walk around the house calling me mommy.
No,
I don't
no,
want people
no.
to get the wrong impression. I've heard some people say, Lisa was calling her mommy all the time, and that's not true. It was this one time, and the next morning even, that she said mommy, and she giggled, and she came in the room, and because Elvis had waited to tell her about the engagement, and I when the time was right for him, and I felt that was, his thing, that wanted him to feel comfortable with that. But she was a sweet girl. I just wished there had been more time for us to be together as well.
Yeah, how long were you with Elvis, when you first started going out and his very untimely death?
It was just shy of 9 months.
Yeah.
I met him in November 1976, and we were together till August 16th, 1977.
Yeah, and you were engaged to be married on Christmas, is that correct?
Well, we became engaged on January 26th, but we had set a wedding date and decided Elvis had asked me, whether I wanted his birthday, my birthday, and or Christmas. And I remembered, I said Christmas would be nice, and he goes, "That'll be our gift to God."
Mm-hmm.
And, in retrospect, I should have picked my birthday. It was sooner, but I
yeah. Well, listen, hindsight is 20/20.
That was okay.
Right? Yeah. With another telling thing about how really thoughtful Elvis was. I know a couple of times, and on YouTube, it's a couple of things when Elvis would introduce you during one of his concerts as my girlfriend. And there are a couple of times he didn't introduce you as his fiancée, and that's because he hadn't told Lisa Marie yet. And I just think it's so telling about the type of person that Elvis was, that he wouldn't, that he was so appropriate all the time.
Well, he was very protective of our relationship, and I don't think he knew how the press would react, and he wasn't ready. When the time was right for him, he was going to do it, and he was very guarded with that. And I was just thrilled that he had announced me, and I was, this was when it was being filmed for a CBS special, and
I remember watching that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he knew I was shy about it, and, you just couldn't tell. Sometimes you knew if he was going to introduce you, but most times you didn't. And if you saw him walking a certain way, it was like, uh-oh, is he going to do it or not? He would, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that you would also view some of the shows right from the stage as well. What was that like, Ginger? Knowing that Elvis knew you were there, he wanted you on stage, and rhetorical question, but...
No, it was great. I remember the first show I saw, I believe it was San Francisco, I believe, when I first flew in on tour. And he requested that, I sit up behind his sound man. And I was like, wow, I'm right on stage here. And it was great because you're so pulled in, and it was also frightening how the fans would react, and they would chase, he had these scarves he would place around his neck and throw them out to the audience. And I was so worried that someone was going to get hurt. But boy, it really put you in the moment, and just to see every gesture, and he was such a hardworking individual, and wanted to give his audience the best always, and it meant a great deal to him to put on a good show. And even when I wrote about him having pain a lot with his legs and pulling hamstring muscles, and when things weren't up to par, but he always went out and tried to give his all, and I think the majority of the time he put on fantastic performances.
I'll say, could you just take there are so many things that I want to talk about with you, Ginger. I know we're sort of pressed for time, and there are many things I want our listeners to read for themselves in the book. But just more, when the show ended, when the concert ended, I was fascinated by this. How you had to kind of quickly get off the stage, get to that limo. Could you just take us from those few minutes, the chaos that pursued many times after the concert?
Well, I remembered in the very beginning when I stood up to leave for one show, and I heard Elvis say, "Stay," and he was quickly pointing at me in mid-song at the end of his, and I was like, wow, and I sat back down, but I was so worried because I'd been told when he starts singing "Can't Help Falling in Love," for me to be in the car. And I remember, I believe this was in San Francisco, the very first show I was watching, and I went ahead when he turned his back, and I got up and I went off stage. But he didn't like the fact that I hadn't seen the end of his show, and he always did these fantastic karate moves. And so the next night, I remember he said to everyone in the car, he said, "Make sure Ginger stays." And I realized that was what he had wanted me to see. But it was, it could be a little chaotic, It was always a little nerve-wracking. You didn't want to be left standing out and watching the car drive off. But, we just, always made rushed, and you would hear the announcer say, "Elvis has left the building," and we were gone, and on to the next show.
It says so much about you as a person of character at this point in the book, too. Elvis asked you to call your boyfriend to tell him you were breaking up with him because you were going to go out with Elvis. And you told Elvis, "I can't do that over the phone." I mean, it says so much about you as a person. You gently, I don't even know if defied is the right word, but it showed what character you had. And I think that was important to Elvis to see that in a person, see that in you as a person, that... Well, yeah, she's right. She shouldn't do it over the phone.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was an awkward moment that had happened when we were in Las Vegas. And, yes, I'd been seeing a young man for a few months, and he was a very nice young man, but I had quickly gotten so wrapped up in Elvis and fallen in love with Elvis, and I had already spoken to the young man, and he had left things a little, he wasn't sure about it, and I had no plans to see him again. But when I answered Elvis honestly when he asked me if I had been seeing anyone else, and he said, "I'd like it if you wouldn't see anyone else." And I thought, well, no problem, I wasn't going to. But then he reached out the phone and wanted me, and I thought, this is Elvis. Is there an insecure thing here? It blew me away. But I thought, I can't do this right in front of you. I can't, and I felt that I owed it. If he felt that I needed to say something to the young man I'd been seeing, I thought I owe it to him in person, and that's what I was going to do. And Elvis could have a quick temper, and that was the first time I had seen that, and it troubled me. But Elvis would apologize when certain events happened. But I felt it was the right thing to do, and I do think at certain times I challenged him. But like I said, there were a lot of untruths put out, regarding me or my, that I hated touring, or I've seen crazy things, and I'm like, this is what Elvis does for a living. Why would I hate touring, or why would
sure, yeah.
I wrote about a time I came home from a tour, and I don't know if exaggeration started from there and things steamrolled, and that's why I said I have to get the truth out. I have to get this book out for history's sake, and so that people can read, my side and see actually what happened, and not all the speculation coming from some others. And
I remember you writing. Excuse me. I remember you writing about early on, after Elvis had unfortunately passed away, that you didn't use the word blackmail. I'm going to use the word blackmail, but you were almost one of these rags were going to write something, and they said, "Well, if you don't tell your side of the story, we're going to print this story from someone else who had something to say about Elvis." And that's the only reason why you had given an interview at that time. Is that
oh, absolutely. It was I wasn't, the tabloids had, I wrote about how the tabloids had taken unflattering pictures of Elvis sometimes, and they'd put them on the cover, and I hated them, And when he passed away, I said I felt like I had a tiger by the tail. My family and I weren't experienced in this. There were two guys fighting at that time, maybe you only had a couple of tabloids. They were fighting over who would get a story. They were on my front porch, and it was a nightmare. And I wrote it honestly about what happened, and I ended up breaking down and giving an interview. I was petrified, and gave an interview to a tabloid, which came out later. And unfortunately, I think a cousin of Elvis's had taken a picture of Elvis in his casket. And it was on the cover of that tabloid, and it was horrific. And I cried again. And it's you learn from your past experience. But I suffered greatly because of that. But I wrote the truth and what happened and why I did it, and moved on. But it was you learn.
You mentioned, yeah, that's for sure, Ginger. And we're still learning. I don't know about you, but I'm still learning here. You mentioned, I'm sorry, Elvis's insecurities. It's so hard to, another thing that endeared me to both of you while reading your book is that Elvis was a human being. I know it's silly to say it that way, but he was just a guy who had insecurities like everyone else. It almost seems like it How can a guy like Elvis have insecurities, I think to myself, but he was insecure at times, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Steve, it's funny. I remember the first night I met him, he pointed to they had Highway 51 South. They had changed the name a few years earlier to Elvis Presley Boulevard, and he pointed and he said, "I'm not that street out there. If you cut me, I bleed." And he was very shy with that was another thing that endeared me greatly to him. Yeah, he had this little way he would stutter sometimes, and he would call my mother ma'am, and he was quite the Southern gentleman, and wanted to speak with her on the phone, and was quite a gentleman with me. And but yes, he was human, and that's something that I think a lot of people have forgotten with him, and they want to pull out any darkness or any negative things that Elvis may have done. And I thought, well, we're all guilty of certain things, and but he was
Yeah.
under the microscope, and but he was human, and he laughed and he cried the same we do, and that's what I wanted his fans to understand that. And 98% of the time, Elvis was a wonderful, wonderful individual. There may have been 2% where there were dark times, and
That's pretty good
when-
percentages,
that's-
Ginger.
Yeah, that's not who he
98
was, and that's what
Yeah.
people love to pull out.
Sure.
They magnify it.
Yeah. I was fascinated by Elvis's less than traditional sleep schedule, and that you finally had to kind of get used to. Could you share that with us? It's fascinating.
Yeah, he would sleep. When I first met him, I thought he was just enjoying, our time together, and he was just staying up late. And then as time went on, I slowly began to realize this is how he rolls, so to speak. He would stay up pretty much all night long and go to sleep around early morning, 8, 9 o'clock, and then wake around 3 or 4, and start all over again. But that's it's interesting. I've never understood why he developed that habit, but he told me once that all writers and geniuses think better at night.
No,
So I
there
think
you
the
go.
air was still for him. The air was still for him, and I thought maybe this is when he's the most relaxed, and so it took a little bit of getting. I lost a lot of sleep in the beginning, but I was there
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah,
Stayed
you
up
sure
many a
were.
late night.
Yeah, maybe one's defenses are down too at night when it's so quiet. You're able to think better. I don't know, just
Oh, I
just a
think for
thought.
him, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, after shows, it was... Go ahead, sorry.
No, you go right ahead. I'm sorry.
I just think after shows, too, it was hard for him to wind down, and that's why he found refuge in his books that he had become so fond of, and a lot of Eastern philosophy, and he pored over these books and looked over them for hours. He would always wind down after show and talk to other people and see how the show went and talk about things, but, he just finally... start looking over his books, and before he would get sleepy and go to bed. It was usually early morning.
Junior, do we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. The setup at Graceland, it was not, I won't say it's like a hotel, but like you mentioned before, he took care of so many people, so many members of the family. Could you give us the setup? I know the second floor was Elvis's living quarters, but he had his grandma downstairs. And could you just go through that with us, like who lived there and the physical setup?
Delta lived downstairs. I believe his friend Charlie Hodge lived out toward the back, and his grandmother lived right by the stairway off the foyer. But upstairs was his sanctuary. Those were other exaggerations that he was just so lonely and he was just miserable up there. And I thought, he had everything he needed, at the touch of a finger. He called downstairs, the maids brought up his food, and, he did stay upstairs a lot in his room, but I think he felt the most comfortable there, and I think that came from years of being on the road and living in hotels, and, he had his office upstairs, he had an organ that he played up there, his daughter Lisa's bedroom was right down at the end of the hall, and people would come and visit, and he would joke and laugh, and for him, I think it was just like kind of being on the road. And I think it was more private, like I said. His grandmother was downstairs, his aunt, and he didn't seem to be missing anything. I never thought he would never, ever sit downstairs again. But we very rarely, did go downstairs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly thought at some point down the future, in the future, we will go back downstairs. But he enjoyed, he had many good times up there.
Sure. You had a civil relationship with Priscilla. Is that fair to describe it that way? Could you tell us about the first time you met Priscilla? And you did it so well in the book. I mean, that's one of the first things I thought of. What would happen if she ever met Priscilla Presley, and what would it be like? And Priscilla was,
Well,
why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I first, I actually had spoken to Priscilla on the phone first when Elvis took me for a little vacation in Palm Springs in January, and they had remained friendly in their relationship, and he would speak to her at various times. And I remember walking in his room, and he said, "Here," and he hands me the phone, and it's Priscilla. And he said something, "Tell her how to take care of me." Priscilla, and he just hands me the phone. I think he got a kick out of that, but I was like, "Oh my goodness," And she said, "See that he eats right and gets plenty of sleep," and she was very polite. And I probably said okay and handed back the phone, and it was awkward for me. And I said, I was happy. I knew they'd remain friendly for Lisa's sake. And Elvis had become ill while we were on tour in late March, and he had the stomach flu. He was put in the hospital, and I had gone home, and I had left my engagement ring in a jewelry box Elvis had given me in a bathroom at Graceland, and Elvis called me and he wanted to show one of his nurses at the hospital my engagement ring. So I had to go by Graceland to get it. And I didn't know that Priscilla had come in town with Lisa. And I remember Charlie Hodge answered the door, and I saw Lisa peeking her head out from the kitchen, and I was like, wow, Lisa's in town. And Priscilla was sitting with Elvis's grandmother Dodger in Dodger's bedroom. And I walked in, and it was awkward, but she was very nice. We had a nice little talk. We both had I had gotten a Great Dane and named it Odyssey after Elvis's opening theme song, and Priscilla used to have Great Danes, and so she talked a little bit about that with me, and so we visited for a little bit. Lisa came in, visited with us, and then I eventually went upstairs, got my ring, and went off to see Elvis. But that was the meeting that I had with Priscilla, and that was in, I guess, the beginning of April.
Yeah, but Ginger, I'm sure she saw that Elvis was happy, that he was very happy with you, and I'm sure Lisa had nice things to say about you. So how could Priscilla be anything but, civil towards you? She knew that you were the best for Elvis. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope so. I don't know. I don't know what's been said since Elvis's passing or what's been acknowledged, but I just know I know the truth, and that's what's kept me going all these years. But I don't speak with Priscilla. I never knew her well, and I wrote about at the wake.
You wrote about the very, very unfortunate incident when Elvis passed in your book, and we're not going to rehash the details, but talk about a rhetorical question. It had to be surreal. I mean, you're the person that found Elvis. What went through your mind? Like, I can't even imagine what you were feeling.
It was such a unbelievable event, and I wrote, I just looked at Elvis as a rock. He would always be there. Some people in this world you can't imagine the world without, and I never thought about him dying. When he walked in the bathroom, he's 42 years old. You don't die at 42, And it was such a devastating and tragic day, and but I had to be. I felt descriptive, which was very difficult to do, but I had to be descriptive because I've seen quite a few untruths in other books, even on the very day he died, and how he was found and all this. And I said, I can't let that sit out as the truth. That's not what happened. And so that's why I wrote, and as difficult as it was, it had to be done. So I wrote about it. And But to this day, it was such a shock and such a sad event.
Sure. You mentioned as you were riding in the funeral procession, you saw a person taking a picture of the funeral procession driving by. You know who I'm speaking about?
Caroline Kennedy.
Yes. I was amazed by that. Yeah. Could you tell us who you saw out the window?
Well, I just thought it was odd that I looked up. It bothered me. I remembered being in the limousine, and I didn't want to, when I saw the masses and the people lining the street, it just hit me, and I remembered looking down at the floorboard and for a little bit, and I just glanced up, and I looked in this crowd of people, and I saw this woman, because she quickly took a picture, turned, and it registered with me. That looked like Caroline Kennedy. And later, sure enough, I found out she had come to Graceland. But I remember thinking how odd that I would look up at that moment and see her face, and that I would,
Yeah, and boy, she knows what you were going through.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah. You wrote a very lovely poem in your book. It's included, and I love the clever line. I'll walk up very gingerly. And for the listeners who haven't had a chance yet to buy the book Elvis and Ginger, check out the beautiful poem that Ginger Alden wrote. I just wanted to mention that to you, Ginger, that I really loved the poem that you included. It was really touching and really nicely written.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. It was it was something I wanted to do, and little note to him, I guess, so to say.
Yeah. Well, before we say goodbye, I want to let you know, listeners, the book written by Ginger is nothing but class all the way. Really, Ginger, you didn't shun away from the tough things that happened, like I said, with Elvis's passing and things like that, but it was class all the way, and I really appreciate you clearing up so many things that those of us who loved Elvis and love you now that we got to know you so much better as well. You had a career. You sang a great song. You were in a movie, and your song "I'd Rather Have a Memory Than a Dream." I'd like to finish with that song. What could you tell us about your kind of career after Elvis? Quickly, modeling and singing and acting.
Well, yes, I moved from Memphis and I moved up to New York City, I believe in 1980, and I started a career. Fortunately, I was able to model. I was tall enough at the time. Now the girls are quite a bit taller. I'm short, I guess.
How the heck with them?
I went forward, and made a living, and moved up to the city, and I went out for pilot season a few times out to California and lived out there briefly. And moved back to New York City. But, I worked for a good, 15, 16 years until I got pregnant with my son, and then I raised him.
Mm-hmm. And people can find you on Facebook. Is it Ginger Alden Questions? I'm sorry, I should know.
Yes, I do have a question. But I do have I have my personal page, but I have a like page and question and answer.
And, of course, the book, Elvis and Ginger, you can get it all the usual, Amazon.com, all the usual places, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Ginger, I'll tell you, everyone, you won't read a classier author than Ginger Alden. She just told a loving story of Elvis. You're going to love Elvis more. You'll love Ginger Alden. And all I can tell you is thank you so much for spending some time with us, Ginger. It's really appreciated.
Well, I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Steve.